I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is the Knoxville News Sentinel's Adam Sparks. Adam, let me paint you a little picture here. Let's start off this way. The year is 2027. Tennessee has been kicked out of the SEC and is now independent, but acting as rogue as one can with a $50 million payroll for its football roster, which is suddenly stockpiled with the top transfers that college football has to offer. They're tampering for everybody they possibly can. They have five-star talent galore coming through the high school ranks. They've got the Vol Network, an independent TV deal that ESPN basically treats like the Longhorn Network and tries to redo that mistake. Explain how recent developments in the last week or so have made this at least a greater than 0% chance.
Wow, so you think it'll take till 2027 for that to happen?
Fair.
Yeah, the problem would be in that scenario, they wouldn't have anybody to play if recent news. Well, I guess they could play a bunch of FCSs, but yeah, I mean that's timely right now because of the threat or a potential threat of the SEC to kick Tennessee out of the SEC. Now, I don't buy it. I don't think that's legitimate, but it is an attempt at a threat. There's a document that circulated, and Ross Dellinger was the first to report this. There's a document circulated, sort of a drafted document, a pre-draft document of some rules that they've laid out, all the power conferences of what schools can and can't do, that they sort of had to sign this loyalty oath that says we're going to follow NCAA and conference rules even if they contradict state law. And what's basically happened is a lot of states have gotten state laws to sort of work in a partnership with what the House settlement's going to do, that they're just saying, hey, schools can pay college athletes directly. And that's what the House settlement is going to allow, and there's going to be parameters and a structure with that. Most of these other state laws have been drawn up to be a partner to go alongside the House settlement, what's coming in the House settlement. What Tennessee state law did is they added some language that says, yeah, we'll go along with this plan until we don't. And that hit a little differently for the SEC and some of the other conferences because it basically says, yeah, all this House settlement stuff, all this NIL rules, all the rev share stuff, all that stuff is fine unless it looks like it's violating antitrust laws. And if that happens, state universities in Tennessee, especially University of Tennessee, can just opt out of the whole plan and can break the rules because its law says that it can. The primary purpose of that, if you listen to UT, is that they wanted to protect themselves in terms of liability. That they think the next round of lawsuits that are coming, once the House settlement is approved, is going to be directed at schools, not necessarily in the NCAA. And they felt they were too exposed when those lawsuits come, and they don't want to be. And so they think this state law gives them sort of an eject and a parachute. We can hop out of it and say, we're not into this. You don't have to sue us because we're not going to follow it anyway. That's the way that they had planned it. The way that it was taken by the power conferences, the NCAA, is the part of it that says you don't have to follow these rules, which you can understand why they would take it that way. And so now we're sort of at an impasse where Tennessee supposedly has to choose between its state law that says it can do whatever it wants and the pending House settlement that says you have to follow rules.
It could actually be a good thing for a fan of college football if power conferences band together and try and essentially take out the state legislators who are going to do what's going to gain them political points and what's going to be best for their individual teams. If you're a fan of the sport as a whole and not looking at it through your own lens of what's going to benefit my team the most, there could still be a lot of great benefits for something like this. And Tennessee potentially forcing their hand of having this law that all of a sudden puts the College Sports Commission, which is essentially going to be the new enforcement agency that will supersede NCAA and all that as it relates to football. This is probably a net positive, and maybe Tennessee deserves a little bit of credit for kind of getting the ball rolling, because if this doesn't happen, I don't know that we're sitting here having this conversation.
Well, I mean, it's tough to say, because I think there's the argument, I think, of most of the conferences in NCAA is that, like, this came up in a conversation with somebody that works in the NCAA broadly that I had a couple days ago, where this guy said, like, what is Tennessee doing? Like, we're almost to the House settlement. We're almost to the finish line of progress. This thing's going to be signed. It's not going to solve every problem, which everybody knows that, but it's going to be a little. It's going to be a little better. It's going to be a step in the right direction. And Tennessee is throwing this grenade in the middle of this peace treaty, like right before it's signed. Like, just chill out. By the way, the timing is interesting on this state law, because the House settlement was supposed to be approved like a month ago, we thought. And I think Tennessee thought this state law was going to come after the House settlement was approved. So it would sort of quietly exist after it. Instead, it comes before it, because the House settlement is delayed. And so I think it even caught UT off guard that it came when it did. But the way that Tennessee sees it is sort of back to my peace treaty analogy, as sloppy as it is. They're saying, you want us to disarm in terms of liability right before this ceasefire is signed. We don't think this ceasefire is going to fix anything. We don't think it's going to last. So we're not going to disarm before that happens, because we think it's going to fail. And by the way, most people in college sports that I talk to also think the House settlement's going to fail. They don't think it's going to fix anything. It's gonna fall flat on its face. Tennessee is just putting its skepticism out in front of everybody rather than being a team player. Tennessee is acting in its own self-interests, and that may be smart, but it's hurting the team element of this, and that's where a lot of the frustration comes from others. I don't know if this is the right decision or not, but they're trying to protect themselves first and the SEC second, and that's the order that most people, do anything by on self-interest. It's just Tennessee kind of brazenly puts it out there rather than does it quietly behind the scenes.
Tennessee to the SEC is the late Al Davis to the NFL.
Yes.
It's kind of
I like that comp. Yeah.
Yeah. It always feels like Tennessee and some sort of bureaucratic party are at odds with one another, and Tennessee's trying to look for this way to be able to do its business, and understandably so, when you've got a lot on the line, and it makes sense. And to the point of, there are a lot of people that don't think that this House settlement is going to solve every issue in college athletics. There's a lot to be said for that, because it doesn't necessarily create the unions that probably are needed to treat athletes as employees. It doesn't answer that question. It doesn't answer the transfer portal question that seem to be the biggest issues facing current college athletics, and who's going to police all of the NIL stuff behind the scenes. Is the College Sports Commission going to do that? So there are a lot of unknowns that are still to be determined with all of this, but more likely than not, it seems like this is either some variation of the alliance, or, I don't know. Like, there are a lot of ways that you could look at this pact that you could come up with. But what do you think ends up being the decision from Tennessee, from the university? So much, not so much the state, but is Tennessee pretty much now forced to side with the SEC in this power conference pact that's been created to try and prevent states from going rogue and making their own rules?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a negotiating tactic, that's for sure. Somebody's going to have to relent here to some extent. Somebody's going to have to give ground. The problem is, I don't know how that happens. Like, if this is just, Danny White and Greg Sankey sitting in a room and drawing something up and shaking hands, I think that could be fixed. The problem is, it's a state law that's on the books. And, like, what would Tennessee have to do? They would have to go back to their legislatures and say, hey, listen, we went a little strong on that. Let's do a new bill and let's just soften the language a little bit. Like I don't think that's maybe that happens. Maybe that's the solution. But otherwise, the negotiation would have to be that Tennessee says, listen, it's a state law. It's on the books. It says we can do whatever we want, when we want, but we promise we won't do that. Like that's sort of, that's the only way. And I don't see that happen. I mean, maybe if SEC buys that, then that's one way to solve it. And for people to understand, I mean, Tennessee versus the NCAA does have a history back years and decades. But this regime right now that is in power, which gets A-pluses across the board from the UT fan base, the chancellor, the AD, coach on down the line. This sort of this attack tactic goes back to the Jeremy Pruitt investigation. There was one line one document that I got in a huge document dump during that, which revealed that Tennessee used the state attorney general to, in one letter, threaten a lawsuit against the NCAA during the Jeremy Pruitt scandal. And that essentially said, the Tennessee attorney general said, if you give Tennessee a bowl ban, I will sue you on behalf of UT, but the state of Tennessee. And it showed in a lot of investigative pieces that it did that worked, that helped. And Tennessee thought, really, we can use a state lawmaker or a state attorney general to move things just a little bit with the NCAA. We can threaten, and the NCAA will respond to it. And that was, they've used that a number of times now. They sued the NCAA a year ago over that, got rid of NIL recruiting rules. That was in the whole Nico affair. That was to protect NCAA investigation against the NIL deal that they had given Nico Iamaleava, who obviously is now at UCLA. That's a whole other story that we may get to. But they've used lawmakers to draw up bills and laws to help them out. They found a few years ago that if they use their state lawmakers to go after the NCAA, it's gonna net progress. They may have overplayed their hand here, because I don't think they thought the SEC would be against them. They thought they would be for them, or they could just quietly go under the radar. So we'll see if it worked or not. But I just don't know. I think a negotiation, somewhere meet in the middle, is the way to do it. I just don't know how you would accomplish that.
Get the state attorney general to negotiate some sort of peace treaty. That's the way this all gets solved.
Yeah, why not? I mean, and here's the thing too. People think, like, how in real life could this play out? Like, why is Tennessee fighting this at all? Think about it like this, and again, I'll credit Dellinger on this. I know he had a report about that the NIL clearinghouse looked back at old NIL deals and determined, I think, like 70% of the ones that were from collectives would be void in the new era. Okay, imagine if Tennessee has an athlete, football or basketball, that they're paying $3 million. They just got a 5-star basketball player that the word is it's something around there. So let's say he has a $3 million contract, NIL. $2.5 million is from the collective, and then $500,000 is from rev share or some type of legitimate business, car dealership or something. So in the new system, the fear is that $500,000 would be approved, the $2.5 million would be declined. Well, if that happens, he may sue the NCAA or sue the SEC or whoever. I'm just speculating. I'm not saying a specific person, but that athlete would sue one of those entities. But that athlete also could say, Tennessee's the one that promised this to me. I signed for $3 million to that school, and now they're reneging on this. I'm going to go sue them to get the $2.5 million. And if Tennessee's following its new law, it can say, no, listen, that's not us. In fact, we're opting out of it. We're approving your deal. We're going to pay your deal. And the NCAA and the SEC can kick rocks because we don't have to follow their rules. We're just going to go at it on our own to avoid a lawsuit. That's sort of the real life scenario that could play out.
Messy. Very, very messy, it sounds like. I think that's how everybody would describe the Nico situation that has been really unfolding since December. Can you take us back to that? Because we've all now seen where this kind of began. There were reports that he and certain teammates were looking for more money just to be able to play in playoff games. And, Tennessee pushed off negotiations. Like, all right, let's discuss this stuff after the season. How did it reach the boiling point that it got to over the course of the next 4 months?
Yeah, I think there's some truths and myths in all this. Here's the best way that I believe this happened. I don't think Nico was holding out for a playoff game. I've never seen evidence of that. I've talked to people on and off the record. Never. I don't think that's true. I do think some players were paid a little extra before the playoff game. That's pretty typical now. I mean, Jermod McCoy, their All-American corner, was vastly underpaid, and they went and gave him more money in the middle of the season. You do that to sort of wet the beak, keep them around. So Nico may have been paid more then, but I don't think he was going to hold out for the playoff game. But Team Nico, I like to call them, that's like Nico's dad, Nico's advisor, who has a history on Dan Mullen's staff at Florida, got into NCAA trouble back then. He's now an advisor to athletes. You know how this goes, all these like 7-on-7 coaches and all this sort of stuff, handlers. That group, like Team Nico, my understanding is that they were shopping him around in December and coming to Tennessee or to the collective and sort of saying, hey, like, listen, you pay him this, you give him a raise, he'll stay. Otherwise, he may go in the portal because we're hearing that there are buyers elsewhere. And Tennessee called their bluff, and he did not go into the portal back in December. I thought he was. I had a big story written that was ready to hit send at midnight when the portal was closing. Him and a few other players. There were hints out there that he would go. He didn't. They thought they dodged a bullet. We all thought that was over. And then Nico was great. He's always been great. Dealt with us. His teammates like him. And then Team Nico was sort of absent from campus for a couple of months leading up into spring practice. And I've had people behind the scenes tell me that's like the most integrated into the team, the happiest that Nico has been since he's been on campus at Tennessee. And you can kind of surmise that's because Team Nico, the handlers, were on the other side of the country, and he was just a quarterback. But my understanding is during that time, leading up to spring practice, somewhere in there, Team Nico went back out and started shopping him again. During December, they were shopping him more. Miami was one of the places rumored, some in the Southeast. Leading up to spring, you certainly have SECs off the table because you can't go interconference. They started shopping him to the West Coast, UCLA, USC, Oregon. We obviously have seen now that Oregon, in some form or fashion, contacted Tennessee or representatives of Tennessee and said, "Hey, listen, your boy's shopping himself out here, or at least people are for him." And so they tried to the same tactic they used in December, they used in the spring, which was to shop him around to drive up the price with Tennessee so that they could come back to Tennessee and say, hey, listen, you got to give us a raise now because we have potential buyers out here. And the truth, I think, was, I won't go into too many details, but the truth, I think, was in December, they were not getting offers for more than he was already making at Tennessee. And when they shopped him around in the spring, the offers also were not as much as he was making at Tennessee. And so Tennessee, again, I think having a pretty good handle on the market, said, you're not getting a raise, and we don't think you can get a raise if you go out on the open market. He may have in December, don't know, but certainly not in the spring. And then push came to shove. There was some finger pointing back and forth. Obviously, the story got leaked, and that sort of heightened everything. I think Nico was going to leave no matter what. The plan, I think, was that he was going to leave after the spring game. So he would be off campus. He would be in California. We would all get the news there. And instead, it got leaked. I think by Tennessee's side leaked
Absolutely.
it. And because what you're doing is you're forcing sort of the PR problem onto Nico. And I think they all knew, both sides knew that the divorce was pending. And so when that happened, Nico was faced with the the scenario where he was going to have to go to a spring game and probably get booed by tens of thousands of people because he was asking reportedly for his salary to go from 2.5 million to 3.5 to 4 million. And boosters that pay that and also fans that contribute a little to that, I think probably said he was solid last season for a playoff team, but he probably was overpaid last year. So it's kind of hard to ask for a raise after last season. And he didn't show up to practice. Now, in the ESPN piece that Chris Lowe had, sources close to Nico said that Nico decided not to go to practice, but that he was advised he should go to practice. I haven't talked to Chris about it, but I think the sources would be from Team Nico. And if that's the case, that means Team Nico, the dad, the handler, are putting the blame on the bad decision on the kid rather than on themselves. And my understanding was that was flipped the other way around. By the way, you're hurting him down the road, because if he's to blame, that's a problem in the NFL draft a year from now. So it was, but that would be consistent with, I think, how Nico was handled. I never had any problems with Nico at all. He was awesome. Coaches said he was awesome. The problems were in the problems and the friction was always with Team Nico. They wanted everything private, and obviously with the collective here, they wanted more money. I think the fault mostly goes with them, not Nico. I mean, he's 20-something years old, but still.
Adam, if Team Nico goes to Tennessee in December and says, we want 3 million and that's the number, instead of the 3.5 to 4 million that we heard about being thrown out there in spring, if they just stick at that $3 million number, is Nico still a Vol?
Yeah, I think so. Well, what you're describing there is what an agent would do, right? An agent would say, hey, listen, back channels, we think we can get 4 million. Tennessee would say, we know that's not true, and we'll call those collectives and they'll tell us, which I think happened, by the way. It is funny with these collectives. A couple years ago, they were all enemies. They wouldn't talk. Now the collectives call each other to see what the market is. Like, hey, if we're getting screwed, you're getting screwed. So let's communicate, and both of us will be good. So yeah, an agent would have said 4 million. They would say that's ridiculous. 2.8, and then then the agent would have said 3, and then they would have said 2.9, and then it's done. And you sign it, and he got a raise of a few $100,000, and it's over. But that's not how this went. And I mean, I think you saw the episode play out again, repeat in the spring after Nico left. That, I mean, every indication we've got out of UCLA is that he got less money there than he was making at Tennessee. And I think the problem was they tried to go get an agent after the fact, and anybody that they interviewed said, okay, well, like, what are you looking for if you hire me? Well, we want $4 million. Okay, well, that's not going to happen. I can get you 2.7, or I can get you 2.8, and, they're like, well, no, we want 4. Well, that's, I want a 9-story house. But as I talk to you, I'm in the 2nd story because that's as many as I could afford. I mean, it's the number is what the number is. There's a buyer and a seller, and they both have to agree. And Team Nico is not in the middle of the buyer and the seller. It's the player and whoever will pay him. And so an agent would have fixed all this a long time ago. But as you and I have seen many, many times, most bad decisions and when it comes to money and these type of things, pro or college now, is because the uncle wants to be the agent instead of an agent. And, you don't want your uncle as your lawyer or anything else. Just hire a professional, and they didn't do that.
Joey Aguilar steps in from UCLA by way of App State. He's someone who maybe directly benefits from the way that all this played out with Nico, because that guy threw more interceptions than anyone in college football last year as a quarterback at App State. And now he's getting an opportunity to be QB1 at Tennessee. What's been your early impression of him?
Well, we haven't gotten one-on-ones with him yet, and they're probably not going to make him available to media until close to fall camp. And that's actually a strategic move. They want this to be a legitimate competition between him and Jake Merklinger, who would have been Nico's backup, and George McIntyre, who's a freshman. And I believe it. I think it'll be a legitimate competition. But Aguilar, I mean, it's a funny thing with him because he was a good player at App State. Threw too many interceptions last season, but there's some reasons behind that. He lands at UCLA, which I think is probably sort of a dream scenario for him. He's from California. He played junior college in California because he had no D1 offers. So this guy's sort of coming home and playing for one of the big state universities. So that would seem like a dream situation. But now he's shifted back to Tennessee. I mean, he was in Boone, North Carolina. Now he's at Tennessee. It's not far apart. So he's familiar with the area. But so that's sort of a downgrade for him that he's not in California where he wanted to be back home. But it's an upgrade because he's in the SEC. I mean, he couldn't get picked up by an SEC team 6 months ago. So he sort of like has fallen into a great situation. But it is a tough situation because Josh Heupel, in some ways, his offense is simple. In other ways, it's complicated. It takes a lot of reps. You got to know the tempo. You got to know how some of the blocking schemes work. You've got to know really the rapport and the chemistry with the receivers matters a lot. They do a lot of things with choice routes where wide receivers are reacting to the defensive back off the line of scrimmage. So it's not necessarily where every receiving combination is called. A receiver does not necessarily know what they're running before the snap of the ball. Neither does the quarterback. And that works when you have a lot of reps. Worked great with Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman a couple, 3 years ago. But if you don't have the reps and you don't have that chemistry, it's not going to work. And so he's having to get that in the summer. Right now, while we're recording this, Tennessee players are off campus for a short break. They'll be back June 1st, June 2nd. That's when workouts will start. Joey's going to have to get a rapport quickly. He's going to have to learn the playbook, which he just moved here a few days ago. And he's basically just spending all his time in the playbook and film and trying to do a crash course on this offense, which, by the way, he just did a crash course in UCLA's offense. This is I think the fourth offense that he has been in 28 months. Junior college, App State, UCLA, now UT. So maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a bad thing. I don't know. But I don't know that it's his job to lose, but it is his job to gain. Tennessee went in to get an established starter in the portal. So that told you right there that they wanted a better option than Jake Merklinger. Jake Merklinger had a good spring. He thought he had progressed enough to be a good backup for Nico. But it's a big difference between, being a good backup, a serviceable backup as a young player, and being a guy who could start against Georgia in like week 3. That's a pretty big leap. And I don't know if Aguilar is up to that or not. We'll see.
You and I have talked about that before, about how when Nico came on board, there's a reason why he didn't start as a true freshman and why they really sought the experience of Joe Milton in year 3 in the scheme to come in and run the offense, as opposed to just turning it all over to Nico. Just because you're running a quarterback friendly offense doesn't mean that it's easy to learn. Once you learn it, there are quarterback friendly elements to it, as opposed to like a Jimbo Fisher offense, which when you learn it, do you really learn it? Or is it still just really complicated with the terminology that he uses? But it's a good point, because I do think there are a lot of people that would like to just treat this year as a gap year for Tennessee and just say, you know what, we know we're probably not going to be great at the quarterback position, but let's just see what the young guy has. Let's just see what Jake Merklinger has. And let's not necessarily worry about, hey, we got to get to 9-3 this year. Do you think Josh Heupel will have that approach? Do you think he's built up enough good faith with now Tennessee's best 3-year stretch in the last 2 decades to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to play the long game. And even if that means kind of taking my lumps with a young guy like Jake Merklinger, I'm willing to go that route. Like, is that a realistic path for him to follow?
A decade ago, I think that would have been realistic. I think college football fans now, especially SEC fans, are smarter than to give that grace. And what I mean by that is, in the era of the transfer portal and NIL, like, you don't get the luxury of a rebuilding year or a let's build up to next year kind of season. You should be able to reload and go get players. And by the way, one of the big criticisms even before Nico left is that Tennessee did not go get a premier wide receiver in the portal. They didn't in December, they didn't in the spring, and now they're pretty thin at wide receiver. They have some young talent, but they're thin and inexperienced. But now A lot of the reaction right after Nico left was like everybody was patting Josh Heupel on the back, like, "Hey, way to stick with your principles and don't give in to this kid. He misses practice, he leaves the team. You tell him don't come back. We're not paying that kid." And there's, I think there was some, I think that makes sense that reaction. But winning that press conference in April, that grace usually does not extend in this conference to October, November. There will be some fans that will say, "Hey, listen, he was, untimely departure by Nico. They couldn't fix that. That wasn't their fault. We'll give them a little bit of grace." But grace means, for most Tennessee fans, I think, "Hey, we don't want you fired if you can't go to the playoffs this year. We thought you'd be 10-2. We'll allow 9-3." The thing is I don't think Tennessee was going to go to the playoff anyway. I thought they were probably about a 9-3 team. So I think 8-4 would be an accomplishment with this roster. But what if they're 7-5? Like, I just don't see any Tennessee fans saying, we'll give him a mulligan. It's okay. You've got to reload. And also, Tennessee fans know that there's a schedule there to at least go 8-4, even if you're down in some spots. I mean, you could lose to Georgia, Alabama, Florida in the Swamp, and even lose to probably an improved Oklahoma team in Neyland. That's 4 losses. You can still go 8. You can lose all those and still go 8-4, which means you got to beat Kentucky, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Arkansas at home, and Syracuse. Like, those teams I just listed, it shouldn't be that tough to go 8-4. He'll be given some grace, but not a ton. And he's got to, and especially depends on what fails. Like, if wide receiver is a problem, well, dude, listen, that was a problem before Nico left. We all have that memory. If Joey Aguilar is not the guy, that's understandable. I mean, I covered the Sun Belt for a long time, and there were a lot of Sun Belt quarterbacks that were great at that level that just I knew would not succeed at the SEC level, which is why I'm intrigued by Aguilar to know which group he's in. But the criticism. What if Joey doesn't work out? We get that, why that would be. If Merklinger doesn't pan out, well, I mean, Josh Heupel's supposedly the quarterback whisperer, and he's won with every quarterback imaginable, every type imaginable, and he promotes that because it's true. But Jake Merklinger was a high 4-star who chose Tennessee over like Georgia and a few SEC programs, and he's been in the system for a year. Like, he should be able to play reasonably well. And if he can't, and Aguilar can't, then you start to get things bubbling up about issues with the offense. Because even, again, before Nico left, there was a pretty fair criticism that Josh Heupel's offense had grown stale and the SEC defenses had adjusted to it. All those criticisms will come back up if they struggle mightily this year. But if they can push through 8-4, beat somebody you wouldn't think they would beat, I think he'll get some grace, but only a small measure.
Yeah, there's so many different things to consider. And 7-5, that's the line that we've been talking about for a while. Hey, what does 7-5 include? Does it include one of those games that you're not supposed to win? And does it mean 7-5 with defensive regression? Because that's considered different for Heupel. Does Matthews become that go-to guy in the receiver room amidst a 7-5 season? Like, there are a lot of these different layers to dissect where if it goes wrong for Heupel, a lot of people are going to start talking about, man, you're right, quarterback whisperer. Are we really seeing it at the level that we need to? Why hasn't, Jalen Hyatt has the best season in the NFL of a Heupel era skill player. And it was his rookie year when he had 373 receiving yards and no touchdowns. Yeah. I mean, that's a tough thing to hang over you if you're an offensive-minded head coach. And there are going to be these things that if it doesn't work out this year, even in what's considered a gap year of sorts for Tennessee, that people will start to use that against Heupel. But right now, as we sit here, we're talking May 21st. Does Josh Heupel have the highest approval rating of a Tennessee coach in the post-Fulmer era?
Yes. I mean, him and I would say Butch Jones would be somewhat comparable after Butch's third season. He went 9-4. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, and going into 16, which also he was 9-4, but the it was done by mid-season of 2016, where I think people started thinking, this guy's hit his ceiling and it's about to fall off a cliff. By the way, I don't think it's fair, but the critics of Josh Heupel fear that this guy has hit his ceiling, a higher ceiling than Butch Jones. I mean, he just went to the playoff. He won 11 games, 9 games, 10 games. He won 30 games in 3 years. But the critics of him fear that, and they point back to UCF. Hey, once Scott Frost's players were gone, Josh Heupel was starting to slump a little bit, and so they fear that's the same thing with Jeremy Pruitt's players now gone. I think there's some truth to all that. I just don't think the degree of the criticism should be as strong. It's a funny thing is that I would say, to answer your question, I think the jury is out for some. Like, they're hopeful. He does have a pretty high rating with Tennessee fans, but they're only cautiously optimistic because they want these narratives to be proven wrong. He can win after Jeremy Pruitt's players. He can adjust his offense. He can be good on the road. Every year he's lost one terrible road game. He can push beyond 10 wins and just getting to the playoff and getting blown out by Ohio State. Like, that's not the ceiling. He can push beyond that. They are cautiously optimistic that he can prove those things wrong, but he's got to do it. And he's raised the expectations of that. I think it's funny that in some ways Josh Heupel has been a victim of his own reputation. Like, he's always had the reputation of offensive guru, quarterback guru. Hey, his offenses will pass for 1,000,000 yards, and that's what he is. Well, if you look at the last 2 years, Tennessee has been very good on defense. It's their best 2-year defensive stretch in about 20 years at Tennessee. And he's led the SEC in rushing each of the last 2 years. Well, any other coach, if you said that was Phil Fulmer, hey, top 3 defense in the SEC, top rushing offense in the SEC, you would say, well, that's Phil Fulmer. That's why they're so good. But because it's Josh Heupel, it's more of that, like, well, that happened in spite of him, because he's not that type of coach. So all these things were more of a lucky break. So I think he's been a little bit of a victim of his own reputation, because the metrics say the trajectory of this program is going up. The narratives say this is sort of stagnant.
It's a good way to look at it. And I just think it depends on your lens. It depends on how you're viewing this. And I do believe Josh Heupel this past season adjusted in ways that no post-Fulmer Tennessee coach would have been able to, at least not en route to a 10-win season. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. And I think that they're still in such a better place than they've been really throughout the vast majority of the 21st century. And if you're a Tennessee fan, just holding on to hope that's what you can hold on to, is that you've had a guy that's weathered the storm better than you could have hoped for when he signed up for it. Adam, really, really great stuff. I know you got a ton of stuff going on right now in the offseason. It's never a quiet offseason on Rocky Top. That's just not the way that things go. But we'll do this again real soon, man.
All right. Good to be on.